Hello again, whiskey friends. Man, am I excited to go through this today. We have the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch A123. And man, have I been really impressed with this one. We're going to go into the reasons why. We're going to grade this thing at the end. But off of the first fourth of the bottle here, I'll tell you already, it's a winner. But let's go through why. Let's break it down together and get into this. So let's kick off the show. Thanks for joining me, everybody. All right. As I said off the top, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof A123. And then in today's tasting, we're going to have a lifetime whiskey glass, if you can see that. Cheers to Dan and Julie. So before we dive into that, I'll let that thing open up just a little bit longer since I just poured it. And this is a 12-year product here. It needs a little time to breathe. Let's go into the stats first. Yes, 12-year age-stated product when it comes to these Elijah Craig barrel proofs. And this one is 125.6 proof. So it's a bit higher proof than what we've seen in 2021 and 2022, but still not as high as what we were getting prior to that in many cases. So it's just somewhere in the middle. Now, my relationship with Elijah Craig barrel proof started post pirate bottles. So this was something that I just started buying really in 2018, and I was able to get nearly every iteration of it from A117 all the way to today. But there was a point where I was getting these in 2017, 2018, 2019 in Ohio and Kentucky. Man, did that well dry out. I think the word got out on these too much. I never see them in Kentucky anymore. And when it comes to Ohio, I'm pretty sure you got to wait in line before the store opens to have a shot at one of these. I haven't seen it in Ohio for quite a while. So the last 3 years, I have been dependent on lots of whiskey friends to find me these and get me these so that I can continue to experience the entire series. With that said, before going into this, the C batches, when it comes to C1, C197. No, I got it backwards. There we go. C917. Man, the years are confusing me now with these numbers. But C917, C918, C119, those were like the best ones of those eras. And then the year 2020 was just a record year for this brand. But then the last 2 years, I don't know, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride. I really didn't like any of the 2021 batches to an extreme degree, and the 2022 batches left me wanting on first impression, but then dominated a whole bunch of blinds. So, you know, whatever I can say there. This one though, A123, first impression on it, man, this is a flavor bomb. And even upon smelling it for the first time, I was like, holy crap, this one's going to be special. But I did spend quite a bit of time with it. I had about 3 to 4 tastings with it before I laid down the official scores that we'll be going on to in just a moment. Before we get to the official scores, let's go through a tasting of this. We're going to break down the nose. We're going to walk through the tasting experience, front palate, mid palate, into the finish. Cheers, everybody. Thank you for joining me thus far. Man, I adore the oak on this thing. It is just beautiful, perfect oak, and everything I want out of Elijah Craig and that 12-year age statement, and anything I want, especially out of a barrel proof, anything that's around 12, 13 years old. I mean, it's just the perfect oak. I would just love to have this in more bourbons in general. Gosh, I love that. Next up, I continue to get shades of this. I talk about toffee a little bit, but then it really lingers into a Butterfingers bar. Um, and when I'm talking about the Butterfingers bar, I'm really like talking about every component of that Butterfingers bar, the chocolate, the peanut butter on the inside, the toffee stuff on the inside. It really does remind me of a Buttersfinger bar through and through, and I can pretty much break down all the different notes in that candy bar. Other notes I could throw out there would be like a salted pretzel stick in this case. Um, like if you just cracked open a bag of pretzel sticks. And then I think the one thing I do struggle with a little bit is there any fruit on this nose? It's not readily apparent. The best description I've been able to come up with so far has been essentially a cinnamon applesauce kind of a smell to it. So not a freshly sliced apple, just more of a meshed apple with sugar and cinnamon all thrown in and all combined there. And then you kind of crack that jar open or sitting there at the lunch table when you were a kid. Spice wise, hint of clove is on there, and I think that essentially takes it through it. Yeah, maybe there's some powdered sugar as well, but I'm starting to get on the fringes of this thing and probably over explaining it. But all in all, the oak note on it is beautiful, and then it's combined with a powdered sugar covered Butterfinger bar, which sounds absolutely delicious. And then you got this whole thing maybe with the applesauce going off on the side, but that's really me just trying to find fruit. It might even be more apt to say the fruit's really not there on the nose. All right. Well, that's all I'm going to get there. Let's go into the tasting here and start breaking this one down because this is where I'm going to get real excited. Oh, it's so awesome. Um, let's go front of the palate first. But I would say that and gosh, I'm having a problem thinking of other whiskeys that kinda stand up to the experience that this gives on the front of the palate. The depth of the flavor on the front of the palate, when you get this, if you're able to withstand the proof, get a little bit, let it sit on your tongue, swish it around, really get to know it before you take an official swallow of it. It gives so much flavor. Sometimes I think when I'm kinda describing what I'm getting up front, it's just more generic, brown sugar, cinnamons. This one is a flavor wheel immediately. We're talking fruit explosion. So I talked about there not being any fruits on the nose, truly. But if we get into what you can taste immediately, I would equate it more to either a fruit jam or zero in on raspberry. And maybe even say a raspberry blackberry medley. But man, is it really, really rich. Um, Now, what's interesting is as I talk about how rich the flavors are, the mouthfeel, though, I wouldn't say is that creamy or oily, surprisingly so. It's kind of just kind of neutral. Nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't stick out as a pleasurable physical experience when I talk about what it's doing in my tongue and with my mouth. Then when we get into mid palate, um, what this really reminds me of, and this is going back to the powdered sugar, the blackberry jam, the raspberry jam, that I've mentioned before, either on the nose or the front of the palate. But bringing that forward, it's then getting combined with a pastry dough that reminds me, if I'm saying it right, of a hamantaschen cookie. That's this diamond shaped cookie with some jelly in the middle. Man, that is the note that I really hang my hat on. Mid palate is going to be that. There is also a hint of lemon juice, which I find interesting. It's kind of separate. It's off to the side. It's its own distinct experience that you can kind of track the legs to, but it just kind of runs its different course than the other flavors. Hmm. Now, this is where we get into the finish, and it does start losing me a little bit. Um, there is a moment between mid palate into the finish where all of those great flavors I talked about, rather than living on, they hit an oak wall and they stop. And the oak is all that remains. And the oak at first uh, turns the volume up a little bit, and then it goes from the volume of like 8 to the volume of 4. But then it lingers there at a 4 for a long period of time. But it doesn't give you anything really beyond the oak. Um, if I really want to grasp at it, that Butterfinger note does come back on the finish, but I mean, it is at a volume of like 1 and 2 compared to the oak being a volume of 4, but like initially 8. And I think that's the thing for me that probably keeps this one from being a all-time great ECBP is that I don't like the finish all that much. Um, Despite how much I love the oak everywhere else at the beginning of this experience and how much flavor it was giving me up front, it does kind of hit a little bit of a wall with me when it comes to the finish, the depth of the finish, and the length of the finish is all right. I just don't necessarily care what it's lingering me with. Well, let's load up the scores here and go through the official review. So on the channel here, we've got 3 different components that go into our scoring system. There's a flavor score that's worth 40%, an experience score worth 50%, and a value score worth 10%. Now, keep in mind, all of the scores that go into this, there are a whole bunch more metrics. They just get summarized in this fashion so that it's easier to consume. But there are 10 different metrics that go into all these different things. But ultimately, flavor is just uh, how much you enjoy each step of the experience. Whereas the experience score is a more technical score when we're talking about the mouthfeel, the complexity, the length of the finish, truly kind of the art of the whiskey versus just the raw, do I like it or not? And then value has to play a role in here. We give it 10%, but how good of a value is this experience for the price paid? In this particular case, I paid $80 for this bottle. I don't think I mentioned that off the top. But ultimately, you're looking at a flavor score of 85. Man, do I gush on this thing, especially with the nose and the front of the palate and you know, mid palate still scored pretty good. It was just the finish that started bringing it down further. Um, it essentially had lower and lower scores the deeper into the experience you got in terms of the flavors. And then because of that, too, the experience kind of got dinged in a few spots as well for just having very good mouth feel or very good finish, very good complexity here and there. So that's where it lost quite a bit of its points, is when we kind of break that side of it down and get into the technical score. But ultimately, what then boosted it's that value score. No, of course, this is getting 100. This is amazing. For $80, this is the second highest scoring overall of the entire year at an 83. So that in itself is very impressive. So when we get into the recommend 0 to 10 scale, that's a 10 out of 10. I mean, everyone needs to get some Elijah Craig barrel proof. I'd say especially this batch. This is a really good batch to either jump on the train with, jump back on the train, or continue on the train. Either way, it fits everybody. Everybody's going to want to taste of this one. This one's fabulous. Now, do I plan to buy another? Um, I of course plan to buy B123 when that comes out. But ultimately, ultimately here, the if I don't find another one of this batch, I mean, I'll buy a backup, but I'm not like going to hunt a backup, I guess is the way to think of that. So if I find another one of this one, yeah, I am going to buy it. But ultimately, I will buy the next batch, definitely. Now, what was really fun is this is the first time that we have successfully completed a trifecta here on the channel, where I've got scores from myself, Kelsey, and Darrell. So I can give you some different points of view as well. But you can see that we are all in very similar ranges on this one. Few different points here or there, but we are very, very similar. Kelsey and I both were same on the flavor. Now we graded a few aspects of it a little differently, but ultimately came to the same conclusion. Very similar range when it came to the experience score. Thus, at the end here, 83 and 85. Darrell was a little lower on it. He was getting a little less of the flavors that he enjoys, but overall, still, looking at something that had more flavor and lost little bit more points on the experience. So his review still rhymes with ours, and he still gave it a 78. So a stone throw away from an 80 and getting that great rating as well. So all three of us combined, as you can see there, now you can get the different perspectives. This is still a really, really great pour that we're all recommending, and we all gave it a perfect score when it came to the value. So please, Heaven Hill, do not let that go to your head and keep that price exactly where it is. Well, thank you for joining me, everybody. That's all we have on today's review, but keep an eye out later because I am going to do a blind flight of the A batches from the last 4 years, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. I want to see how all those grade out and ultimately see if 2020 actually wins it, which I would think is the best one off of memory. But I wouldn't be surprised if this one won or if 2021 won. No, 2022 won. If 2021 won, that one I'd be really surprised on. But you'll have to come back for that. That'll be a different video. Thanks for spending this time with me, everybody. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, whiskey friends.